Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name's Stephen and I'm a traditionally published fantasy author. Today I'm doing a video about word count. I've seen some information flying around online, and this was requested by someone in the comments saying that they had heard rumours of people being instantly rejected because their word counts were wrong. So is there any truth to that? I'm going to have a look at that today and dig into the subject. So let's begin with the extremes. If you're writing in a particular genre, I mentioned that I'm a traditionally published fantasy author because I know the genre very well with which I'm in writing. I read a lot of the books in it, so I'm aware of the kind of books that are being published. You can see some on the shelf behind me. So I know that there are extremes in fantasy, but if we're looking more broadly, there are general word count guides for certain genres. And you can find this out online. It's fairly standard. So, for example, a YA book is typically shorter than, say, a standard fantasy novel. It's just how it tends to work out for the audience. If you look at a middle grade novel, for middle grade readers, there again, it's slightly shorter again. You wouldn't see a 400,000 word middle grade novel. It just doesn't happen. So, if you've written a book in any particular genre, look at what others are being produced, look at the standard length, look at the word counts, flick through a bunch of books, and you can work out an average word count for the entire book if you can't find it out online. It's a very simple way to do it. Just go online, look through, even browse online on bookshops, and it'll tell you, pick the top 10 books within that genre, see the word count, estimate a word average per page, and that'll give you a rough word count. If you don't want to trust any of the stats yourself, you can go out and do the research. So that'll give you a rough idea. If you go over slightly, that's fine. If you go under slightly, that's fine. I'll come on to the reasons why in a minute. I did a poll recently on Twitter and asked a number of fantasy and science fiction writers, self-published and traditional, about their average word counts for their debut novels. And I asked them whether their word counts increased or decrease. So the reason I said it doesn't matter initially if you're slightly over or under is because during the editing process, the word count will change. If you're doing it with an agent, then what will typically happen is you'll work on the book with the agent if they've accepted your initial pitch, because you'll have to redraft it with them before they take it to a publisher. And the word count at that stage will change. It will then go, say you then get a successful agent, an agent says, right, it's now ready to go out to a publisher, or many publishers, you'll send it out. Let's say a publisher says, right, yes, this is great, we'll take it on. You'll then spend several months working on that book with that editor, and then the word count again will change. It will increase and decrease. It really depends upon the books. Now, fantasy is a bit of an unusual genre because you have books that exist on the extremes of the spectrum of the word count. You can have a short fantasy novel, 79, 80,000, and that's considered short, whereas if you look at other genres, that's kind of the max of what you would see. And you can have fantasy books that go up to 250,000, 300,000, even 400,000, but those are the extremes. And eventually it'll get to a point where there is a cutoff. I'm not sure what the word count is, but it could be about 5,000 words, 500,000 words, and that's simply because of physical space. They can't make the text so small and just have a certain number of pages that they can bind it. It just gets to the point where it's not physically possible to do it. It would have to be a really special book, and it'd have to make really unusual circumstances. But even then, you see books getting broken up into two. George R. Martin did it on one of his. Many years before that, Tad Williams did that on Sorrow, Memory and Thorn. The second or the third book, I can't remember which one it is split into two paperbacks because it's such a monster of a thing. But those are unusual circumstances. What will normally happen is, if you send your book into an agent and it's 500,000 words and it's a fantasy novel, they'll probably say, and if they said they enjoyed it, the feedback will be, you need to trim this down a lot. They're not going to instantly reject you. They might say to you, in part of the rejection, one of the reasons is that it's quite long, and maybe they feel it's a bit bloated, and maybe you feel that it just kind of sags in the middle, in which case that isn't just because of the word count. There are other factors too. I can't see anybody saying, I asked for a book of roughly 100,000 and this is 105, therefore I'm just rejecting it. That just doesn't happen. It's another one of these myths that just seems to have sprouted up online, and it just isn't true. So here's some of the results from the feedback from people I asked about their initial debut novels and the word count changes. Okay, so here's some of the list. I've got some names written down and word counts. Mike Shackle, who's been published by Gollancz. His debut book was originally 133,000, and when it was published, it was 166. G.R. Matthews, his book was originally 160, and when it came out, it was 165. Sam Hawke, she started out at 160 and went up to 185. Jeremy Zahl, who publishes science fiction with Gollancz, he started at 139 and it grew to 155. Here's the other flip side. Sarah Daly, hers started at 148,000 and it went down to 105. So that's quite a jump, and quite a lot of that's obviously come out. Maybe it'll get used elsewhere. Maybe it was just there was too much detail in there, but it's quite a good cut. Snorri Christensen, he started at 88, but it only went up to 95. So that's not a huge jump, but obviously there's something in there. But he could have taken out a whole bunch of other stuff and added more in, and it only ended up growing by 7,000, 8,000, because that's what's happened to me in the past. I've been told to tighten up the story but add other details, and in the process of doing that, the book still grows in length. Bengali, who's a self-published fantasy author, his debut started at 130,000, and when it was published, it was 150. Some people have said, does word count matter when you self-publish? And to some degree, yes, it's the same thing. You're still going to have to be edited, and if your editor reads the book and says, it's just too slow, it's just plodding, and it kind of dips and takes ages to pick back up and really get going, then you're going to have to chop the word count out and just really tighten it up. So saying that it has to be a specific length, otherwise it's going to be rejected, just isn't true. There's always some flex. No author that I've ever spoken to has said the book that they sent in stayed exactly the same. It always goes up or down. To what degree and by how many words and by how many pages, it's really an individual thing. It depends upon the story, depends upon how many points of view you've got. If you've only got 2 points of view in a book and they say, we kind of need to know what's going on the other continent, for example, they might say, could you introduce this third point of view? Because you're telling us about it a lot, but we're never actually seeing it. So could you introduce a third point of view that shows us what's going on the other side of the world? So that might be something where suddenly it jumps by an extra 40 or 50k, and that's fine. That's truly up to the perspective of the agent who works with you, and then the editor, and then the publisher. Within any genre, there are those people who exist upon the fringes, those who are the extremes. If you're an established author, you can bend the rules a bit, but to begin with, when you first send in your book, you should be conscious of your word count, you should be conscious of making it as lean and as tight as possible, but once someone's established, sometimes they can then bend the rules. So someone will say, oh, J.K. Rowling had these huge books, and you say, with the Harry Potter ones, but if you go back to the early books, you'll find that the first 3 are actually really quite slim novels. I remember at this time, children's fiction wasn't popular. Not to the degree that it is now, not to the fact that adults will read children's and YA and middle grade books. It just wasn't true. So remember, she was also rejected many, many times. So if she'd gone in with a 700-page book to begin with, the first Harry Potter, then it would have been rejected because everything else in the industry at that time on the bookshelves was just not to that level. There were probably 300 pages, maybe 350. I can't remember the exact word count. If you go back and look at the very first Potter book, it's quite a slim novel. And then the second one and the third one slim. And as the story builds and the fan base grew, they did get a bit bigger. And I'll say this if no one else will. Some of the later books could really have been trimmed down a bit. They were just a bit repetitive. There was too much flab. But I guess at that point she had more leeway and they were more willing to accept longer novels. But there's a rule in terms of the genre. There's a rule in terms of the industry. But an agent isn't going to instantly reject you just because you're slightly over or under. If they like the story, if they like you, if they like the work, they like how you write, they like the characters, you'll get some feedback. But they're not going to just instantly say no just because it's slightly off on the word count, because it never stays the same. So don't worry too much about it being slightly off whatever you've been told. If someone says, oh, they're just going to instantly reject me because of that, that just sounds a bit like sour grapes. It sounds like someone just doesn't want to try. And being rejected is tough. It's really, really tough. When you don't get any feedback, it's worse. But these days, some agents, not all of them, because I won't say they do that, but some will give you some feedback if they can. So try not to worry about that too much. Write the kind of story that you want to. Think about it, study it very carefully, edit it as many times as you can until you feel like it's really ready. Get other people to read it as well. Ask them about the pace if you're worried about the word count. Look at what else is going on within your genre for averages and see if yours falls somewhere within that space. But if you go in with a 500,000 word tome on your first novel and the average in the industry is about 80 for your kind of genre, then it really needs some work. So just a bit of common sense, do your research, talk to other people, talk to other writers within the genre on social media. They're all pretty friendly. They'll all tell you. You can ask these kind of questions. Talk to other agents online. Sometimes they have Ask the Agent things, hashtags on Twitter. There's the same for editors as well. Ask these questions rather than just worrying about it too much. So that's all I'm going to talk about today, but I'll be back soon with another video.